Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. We'll give it a restart here. We appreciate all of you that are participating in our breakout session regarding reconfiguring retail and vacant sites. My name is Mark Abood and I'm with Colliers International. Thank you again for joining me and this exciting 30-minute presentation. As I indicated before, let's grab our pencils. I'd like you to be prepared to take some notes if you like, and please ask questions. I'll be turning my head from time to time to check out any questions that are in the chat room. I would encourage it, and don't be shy. If you don't know the three individuals and their teams that are with me today, you better get to know them. I'd like to welcome Joe Khouri, First Vice President at CBRE, Aaron Massara with BlueMark Capital, and Chris Salata, Chief Operating Officer for Industrial Commercial Properties. Thank you to the three of you for taking time today to participate in our panel discussion. I would love everybody to speak freely. I'm only here as a moderator, so I want you all to join in and participate as much or as little as you like. But the more you participate, the less I have to talk. So thank you again for joining us. I'm going to kick right into it with Chris. I think some of the most relevant, or one of the most relevant projects progressing today in Northeast Ohio regarding the repurposing of an asset is City View Center in Garfield Heights, which is now known as Highland Park. I've had an opportunity to see some of the materials that you've put together and your team has put together on this project as it has progressed. But tell me a little bit about that project. How did it come about? Where did you get the ideas? And I know it's been a long time building, so take us back in time for a few minutes if you could. Chris?
Sure. Good morning, Mark. Thanks so much for having me, and good morning to everyone that's joined us today. Highland Park is a great story. As many of you know, it was originally developed more than a decade ago on a former landfill at the confluence of I-480 and Transportation Boulevard. Our company, Industrial Commercial Properties, as you may know, has been rather active in Northeast Ohio, and we've been rather active in reactivating retail sites similar to Highland Park. We are the group that was behind the redevelopment of Randall Park Mall. We're working actively right now in cities like Garfield Heights and Akron and Elyria on other retail conversions. Clearly, industrial is the belle of the ball right now. And especially in the wake of the pandemic, we've seen such a boom in e-commerce and distribution and logistics. There is such a high demand for that type of space and that type of light industrial use, particularly here in Northeast Ohio. And so actually the way Highland Park came about, we had acquired the former Kmart in Garfield Heights on Rockside, and we're working through a redevelopment plan on that asset. And in conversations with Mayor Kalova and his economic development team at the city of Garfield Heights, they said, hey, would you guys ever have any interest in taking a look at City View? And we did. And he put us in touch with the note holder at the time, a local developer by the name of George Simon. And fast forward 9 months later, Mark, and we are now joint venture partners with Mr. Simon. We've commenced a complete redevelopment of the former retail power center, and we are now converting it and rebranding it as Highland Park. It will now house, light industrial and commercial office uses. We've been able to secure Giant Eagle to stay at the site and get them to commit to a long-term commitment. A lot of people don't even know Giant Eagle's still there. They've been operating there with kind of a boat anchor around their neck from the beginning, but they're doing tremendous numbers there despite the surroundings that they've had to operate in. So we think at the end of the day, look, location, right, as it relates to what we do for a living. But in this instance, the location, you can't beat it. It's an A+ location for any type of use. But the way that the power center sets up, and this is a point to make, I think, about retail conversion in general. Large square footage footprints of the buildings, great column spacing, high ceilings, existing loading that you can either supplement or utilize from day one. All of those aspects of these types of former large big box retail assets lend themselves beautifully to light industrial redevelopment. So We had to go through a little bit of a process there because it was held in a federal receivership, but happy to announce that we did take fee title here within the last couple of weeks. If you haven't been out there to see kind of what we've done on the exterior of the buildings, it looks remarkably different than what you probably remember when Walmart and Joann and others were out there operating. And we've been able to actually put forth a marketing plan that Mark alluded to that will allow us to combine some of these spaces depending on the demand in the market. So we are very close to announcing our first tenant there, our first industrial tenant there. They're going to be taking 50,000 square feet within the former Walmart space. And I should mention that parking, because as we think about, you know, folks like Amazon who continue to grow and are looking for these last mile facilities, parking is a key feature to these assets. You know, no one really needs to operate at 4 to 5 per thousand any longer on a retail basis, but it sets up nicely to park some of those trailers and vans and transportation vehicles that are required to get the products to the neighborhoods. So we're excited about that.
Chris, when did you give me a timeline? What was your first exposure to that asset from a business standpoint? We've all seen it. We all know about it for decades. Of course, anybody who's driven on the bridge or grew up in the area, of course, is aware of City View and you know what's now Highland Park. But when did you professionally get into the mix with a discussion? So
this was just a little bit over a year ago. So Jay talked about speed to market. For us to go through the process with the Ohio EPA, with the federal receivership, with the city of Garfield, and to have it activated with our first tenant within a year, that's warp speed given the history of the site.
And prior to that, no, it wasn't on your radar.
You know, everybody drives by it just about every day, and I think we all question something's going to happen there. It's just a matter of time, and you know, right place, right time. We happen to be the ones to step into it.
That's great. Joe, you've had experience ranging from development, brokerage. What are you telling your clients about some of these reconfigured property opportunities, particularly from the retail big box environment? Talk about some of these opportunities. What makes you get involved? How do you get into the picture, and where does your representation lie, and what kind of advice do you have on these matters? Mute. There you go.
Thanks to Team Neo and everybody for inviting me today. Thanks for being here. My involvement, you know, as a broker is really to try to solve a problem usually. And, you know, the asset classes that, you know, we're talking about, whether it's malls or freestanding big boxes, you know, the challenges can range from, you know, antiquated building where the ceiling's too low and you need to figure out whether it's a scrape or you need to figure out how to go vertical. You know, what we're running into now is, you know, on some of the non-freestanding locations, you know, let's take a mall, for instance. You know, malls typically were built with 3, sometimes even 4 anchors, right? And these days, we don't see a place for that. You know, you're not going to see going forward. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would venture to say that you're not going to see a 4 anchor, 250,000 square foot per store mall, you know, and across with, you know, infill retail around it. You're probably not going to see that anymore. The challenges there are, you know, restrictions, exclusives with tenants, operating agreements, you know, and then you get into the whole, you know, physical aspect of the building. There are just a lot of challenges, and then you try to figure out, you know, how do you unwind or navigate your way through the CCRs? You know, how do you get around the operating agreements in the property, and then how do you figure out the zoning and what the next life of the property is going to be? You know, I think you know, there's so many different case study examples that we can talk about, but you know, indoor entertainment facilities were the saving grace to a lot of big boxes. Then, so you know, the entertainment aspect and movie theaters and cramming as many people into a building as you possibly can for an activity, you know, it isn't what's happening in 2020, 2021. So
Tell me what
yeah, I mean,
kind of
everything from malls.
what kind of things are you particular? What's the hottest item that you're working on? So there's a lot of the communities, of course, have the properties, whether it be the malls or the vacant big boxes. Give me an example of a project that's, of course, of public record that you're jumping in the mix with, and what particularly are you doing, and how are communities getting involved with you on these projects?
Well, I mean, we could go through, you know, as a broker, obviously it's more micro, but higher frequency, right? Like the nature of our biz, right? ICP, we're so lucky to have them in town. They do these massive transformational projects. We do smaller ones, right? But you try to do a lot of them. You know, everything from, the R&D land for Sherwin-Williams in Brecksville. We listed that property and closed it last year. We took a medical MOB in Brunswick on 303. We recently sold that land to Meyer. They're building a new 160,000 square foot grocery store. Everything down to expanding Aladdin's Bakery and moving them to Richmond Heights to, you know, expand their facility. Recently sold the Audi dealership in Willoughby on Menor Avenue to Jack Prince. Land next door to Topgolf for Saucy Brew Works to build their new brewery and restaurant. Municipalities have been, for the ride on most of those, of those projects. And
those are some critical projects that are, to me, you've dotted a lot of communities. Those projects don't get anywhere off the ground, without Aaron. So Aaron, I'm going to bring you into the mix a little bit. A lot of these repurposed properties, do lenders look at these changes more favorably, less favorably? What magically happens to get a capital stack in place from your perspective? And what do the cities want to see from that perspective as well? What gets you into the mix? And tell me about something you have going on. I know you have some projects as well.
Sure. It's a great question. And first and foremost, like Joe and Chris, I want to thank Team Neo, because this is really exciting and I think a really important dialogue that we all want to be involved in and are fortunate to be involved in. High level on down. So BlueMark Capital, for those unfamiliar, we represent 20 to 24 or so life insurance companies, exclusively, semi-exclusively. And for those thinking life insurance companies, they're really debt providers who like to think long-term and like to go long-term. So your standard bank deal that might be 5 years, perhaps 10 years, our life insurance companies like to match their debt with, their actuaries do like to match their debt with longer term debt options, or longer term life insurance policy options that may go 20 to even 30, 35 years. So that long-term debt is really where we play. In addition to those life insurance companies, we represent quite a few other capital sources that like to be involved up and down the capital stack. So where do we get involved? How do we get involved is really, I think, bifurcated into two different buckets. I think developer experience is absolutely key. And that goes, of course, for a city as well as it does for our lenders. Take in the first bucket an extremely experienced developer with whom we've been fortunate enough to work, and that would be Chris, an ICP. I think for an extremely experienced developer, particularly one operating in and around Cleveland, they have by and large access to acquire the asset. Take a vacant asset, take a piece of land, whether it's Highland Park or another one. They have either the capital at hand or they have the relationships to come in, acquire that vacant asset, apply their secret sauce, if you will, whether that's, land entitlements, lease up, renovations, and then ultimately we'll step in to provide that longer term debt, which I think, Mark, to your question, really adds to what a city's looking to do, which is expand that asset's longevity over the 20 to 30-year potential life expectancy of the economic benefits that one could see from that type of project. So again, to put 5 years of financing with a local bank on might be a little bit shorter focused than what we can provide in terms of maybe a 30-year fixed rate, low rate financing on that type of asset. On the flip side, I think that when a developer experience might be, when we might have a developer that's not quite as experienced as ICP, or a developer that is just not in the Cleveland market, we can step in with capital sources who can provide that initial acquisition financing for a vacant project, for land, very creative sorts of capital. And then ultimately on the tail end of that, expand that over, again, a 20, 30, 15-year period to really, again, fix in those economic benefits. The latter bucket has become a little bit more prevalent these days, as I think lenders, whether it's a life company or a traditional lender, doesn't necessarily want to play as aggressively in the permanent debt space at 2.5%, 2.75% interest rates. They want a little bit more creative types of capital.
That's great, Aaron. I'm going to jump into questions. A couple have popped up. Chris, how did Garfield Heights handle the rezoning of Highland Park? Did it have to go to the electorate? Was it referendum? Are your tenants going to operate on conditional use permits? I think that's a pretty straightforward question.
That one's pretty easy. When we got there, it was already zoned mixed use. So our uses were already permitted, but every municipality is different, of course, sure. As you know, Mark.
Sure. Another quick question. A local small town mall is trying to reorganize its business beyond just retail. What industries are finding good homes right now in those kind of locations? Light manufacturing, medical offices, indoor entertainment. Chris and Joe, that's a pretty straightforward one as well. What are you seeing?
Yeah, Joe, I'm sure you're seeing, like us, all of those uses are readily adaptable to a former interior mall location. Our head of development came from a group called Seritage Development, which actually had taken a large portion of Sears portfolio and redeveloping those across the country. And the uses they were putting in place there, Mark, ranged from everything from industrial to multifamily to office. So it all comes down to the attributes of the asset, the physical plant, as well as that location.
Yeah, to expand on Chris's point, Seritage is a client of ours, and we are in real time working with them, representing them on the Sears box at Great Lakes Mall and Mentor. And I'd like to highlight that, where Mentor took a proactive approach towards a zoning charter and being able to, on an administrative basis, modify zoning based on a case-by-case basis without referendum vote. So we are hopefully moving towards a multifamily redevelopment of that 20 or so acre site. So that's a great question and a great example of a municipality, really being proactive and flexible and having open arms to new development. Thanks.
It's an excellent point, Mark, too, for all of the the municipal leaders that are on this call today. If you have these types of assets within your communities and can be proactive on that zoning front, recognizing, and sometimes it's very tough given the history of these sites, but recognizing maybe that it's no longer a retail asset, taking those steps and working with folks like Joe and myself and Mark and your team at Colliers about how and what type of zoning should be in place. What are the demands? What is the market driving for that location? We've seen that. We're going through that right now with Mayor Whitfield in the city of Elyria and his economic development team led by Don Calvert. They're right now out in front of the redevelopment of Midway Mall, thinking through a zoning overlay there that would permit some of these uses to come in immediately, because we've heard all morning, speed to market is so key. And when that RFP comes out, for that big logistics provider, you've got to have an asset that you can act on quickly. So very similar situation played out in Bainbridge Township recently with our development of the Geauga Lake District there. Jeff Markley and Christina O'Brien and the rest of the Lori Benza, the trustees at Bainbridge were very forward thinking and visionary on how they could work through their existing zoning to bring that project to life. Those leaders were a key reason why those projects are going on.
Chris makes a really good point. I think for anybody, you know, in a city council mayoral seat that's sitting here listening to this, you know, we as Clevelanders and being in the real estate business might have a really good idea what type of asset might go in a particular location. And our lending sources, who are very aggressive in particularly multifamily and industrial, really might want those two assets, and oftentimes they fit. But nobody really knows a city like those sitting, you know, probably again out there in the audience now listening to this. They also know what it takes to get done, what it takes to get these projects done. And from that, it's, you know, it's important to have that dialogue backing and forth.
So, you know, I've worked in the law departments of 3 different cities over the years. I'm a former councilman in my community. I've worked a lot with economic development groups and with planning commissions. So, you know, the fumbling around that often happens is something to Jay's point earlier about having the ability to be nimble, and as a community, you know, what are you looking for from the communities, and also what are you walking away from? What is the biggest stumbling block? Is it referendum? Is it you know, age-old history of a community where their things aren't maybe moving as nimble as Jay recommended in his presentation? And do you revisit your no's? If you cast aside, you know, even though a community is coming to you, Chris and Joe, and they're looking for the funding sources, Aaron, when they come to you begging, you know, take a look at this, take a look at that, and you pass because there's other communities that you're involved in other than Northern Ohio. We all know that. But what gets you back into play if you do get back into play?
So I'll take the first shot at that, guys. I think one of the things that is, first of all, it's got to be about the product, right? So the location is important. What is the market driving there? But if you have a cooperative electorate, if you have a cooperative set of leaders within a particular community that have some of that vision for what that site can be, those are the communities that we want to work in, and we're doing that all over Northeast Ohio. Now, a good example of kind of a project that was a no and is now back online is our recent acquisition of the former GM plant in Ontario, just outside of Mansfield there. You know, we took a look at that 5 years ago, and actually they told us no, and they went with an out-of-town developer from Miami. That developer came in, tore down the plant, sold the scrap, and never developed an ounce of square footage there. And so we revisited that when that relationship fell apart. And within the last year, we've now put that 270-acre site under control. That's an incredible site that's, you know, obviously got a ton of infrastructure, power, rail, everything you need there for industrial redevelopment. But it was sitting there. But that was an instance, Mark, where Mayor Randy Hutchinson and his team, they went and acquired the site. So they went and bought the site, and the city owned the site when we got there. And now they've entered into a long-term option agreement with us so that we can work with a group like Team Neo and Jobs Ohio to find ways to bring incentives to activate new industrial development there, which is another key that I think was touched on earlier. Not only the zoning, having the foresight in the zoning, but also to have that incentive package put together. Retail rents, as Joe will tell you, are significantly higher than industrial rents. And the cost of construction, especially ground up right now, is extremely high. So in order to bridge that financial gap, you know, I'd encourage all of the municipal leaders today to start to think through an incentive package that could help drive some of that development.
I see. We have a couple more minutes because I know we started a couple minutes late, so I'm going to keep going until someone tells us we want to hold back or return to the main room. Quickly, give me an example of a community outside of Ohio that you might consider to be a trendsetter or a model for development progress. I know Jay had an opinion from his experience, but I'm particularly punching this out to Chris because I think you do projects well beyond our borders. And I know, Joe, you're aware of projects that are well beyond our borders. Give me an example that our leadership can look to say, hey, I need to learn more about what they're doing to be a progressive, nimble, et cetera. Maybe a quick answer. Go for it.
Yeah, big example for me is Detroit, Michigan. It is we believe it's the industrial capital of the world right now. People think of Detroit being much smaller than Chicago, but it's really just more of a horizontal Chicago. And right now, the demand for industrial space there is through the roof. And what the various communities are doing there is twofold, Mark. They're putting, things like a GPUD in place that permits this mixed use, including manufacturing and industrial uses. But they're also working not just within their individual communities, but they're partnering, let's say, with the Detroit Regional Partnership. They're partnering with the state of Michigan to put an incentive package that it's actually a uniform incentive package that now rises from the community to the county to the state. And it's almost like an a la carte menu, depending on the type of use and the number of jobs you're bringing to the community that you can tap into as a developer.
Joe, do you have an opinion on a location that you're seeing in the country outside of Ohio right now that's really that's a good model? Do you have any thoughts on that? I know most of your stuff focuses on Ohio.
Yeah, not really. I mean, I think just because we do some business in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh has done a really good job of, all of a sudden there's Facebook and Google and,
Well, you make a great point. I mean, that's a nearby neighbor that's doing a lot of big projects. Why.
Yeah, I mean, we should be, and I think we're going to get there in part because we've got guys like Chris and ICP. We're fortunate to have those guys drive these initiatives on these redevelopments. But yeah, I would say Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's got a lot of really surprising things happening, and they have been happening.
Sure.
I do think, Mark, it's worth noting the incentive packages and the types of programs that Team NEO and Jobs Ohio have provided to us as developers here in the state of Ohio they're first class. And so whether it be the OSIP program that you heard Bill Kaler talk about earlier, or whether it be the Vibrant Communities grants, there are a multitude of programs that Team NEO can offer and can help some of our local municipalities think through and how they bring those dollars into their community. So I would encourage everybody to reach out and connect with that team because there's a lot to tap into.
I love it. I just got the approval to go to 11. I know you all saw some of that message. So I'm going to keep going until they shut us down, and I hope that's okay. And thank you for the questions that are popping up. We're getting quite a few, and I'm trying to get to some of them in a summary in the best way I know how. For all of the community leaders out there, what gets your attention right now? What can community leaders do? I'm sure everybody's throwing projects at you and ideas and creativity at all three of you. What can a community leader, or what can they do collectively to really capture the attention of others, of you, outside of the others that also might be trying to win your love and attention and development and capital expenditure? Tell me what the number one thing is you're looking at.
I think Chris can really dig in hard there, but I will say that we, as well as our lenders, look for cooperation. I mean, that is one of the biggest things. And going back to no's turned yeses and yeses turned no's, one of our more recent projects is Richmond Town Square and the Richmond Town Mall. And seeing as that project has developed, it's truly taken a village. And I think everybody, whether they're on the city side or on the developer side or on our side, would say that, it's taken a village, it's taken collaboration. It truly is a conversation. And I think similar to a lot of other instances, really in life, I mean, you come in, you do your job, and everybody comes together towards that same goal. There are, of course, incentives. For example, we've worked a lot with the sponsor for today, Bricker Eckler, on that very project, and seeing how there are many creative ways to get a project done, and just being open to those ideas. I think remaining open and we're not remaining too steadfast in what an asset used to be is particularly poignant as we look to repurpose some of these assets that need new life today.
Yeah, and I think, Mark,
Yeah,
as we take, go ahead, Joe.
I'll just jump in really quick. I was excited to be invited to this because of the topic of conversation, and because I just happen to be involved in a lot of these situations as a retail broker. I've sort of morphed into, redevelopment of big box to multifamily, and it's become an area of interest for a lot of developers. So I would say chapter 6 of Mr. Jay Gardner's book, Say Yes. I can't stress enough that the opportunity to talk to the folks on this call was I wanted to just say there's, I think at this point, around 8,000 mortgage loan defaults on hotels in the country. Some of these hotels are nearby office space, they're by interchanges, they're big gateways to communities, focal points of community when you get off the highway exit. Obviously, we know big box. We know big box stores. We know the evolution of what those sites are going to be, and they're not going to be retail. So I would just say, please work with us. Have open arms. And if a tenant wants to go into your community, or a developer wants to come into your community, please try to be flexible and be cooperative within the administration as much as you can, as long as the use is appropriate and there's a good case behind it. So
quick question here: is there a project too small for your consideration? For instance, elementary or educational on the commercial Main Street?
Not as far as I'm concerned.
Love it. Love it.
One thing I'd tell everybody is, and for those community leaders that are on the call that we've worked with, we'll give you a quick no if it's not something that fits. I hate long maybes. Everybody's time is way too valuable. But if it's a no, it's also going to come with some thoughts on how you might redevelop it, or perhaps introduce you to some other peers of ours in the industry that may do that type of project. So happy to talk on any project in any community, whether it's a right fit for us. We'll be able to tell you that real quick. But I think just to add on to Joe and Aaron's comment about to your original question, Mark, I think communities can't be afraid to activate a portion of a site first. I think everybody wants to see this grand master plan. Everything's tied up in a bow and we know exactly what's going to happen. My career working on projects like the Flats East Bank and Pinecrest, I get that. That's a master plan community. Everything's got to fit. But when you're talking about reconstructing a site like Richmond Town Square or Randall Park Mall or Midway Mall or Chapel Hill Mall, you can't be afraid as a community to activate maybe just the former Sears box first. That's exactly what Mayor Horrigan in Akron is doing. That's the type of thing that Mayor Whitfield and Elyria is looking at. And it's what Mayor David Smith did in Randall. What most people don't know is that consolidation of the property there at Randall, that took 3 to 4 years to put all those anchors together. And when everything was done, the first project that kicked off there actually was the redevelopment of the Sears, not the Amazon Fulfillment Center. And the reason that was critically important is because, a lot of our colleagues will hear me say a lot, activity breeds activity. And that first project does a couple of things. It changes the narrative for the location, and it tells the market that this is no longer a retail site and there is a government here that is open and flexible to new uses. And that, I think, honestly, and kudos to Mayor Smith there in North Randall, that drove Amazon's interest. Some of these things, it's like, I'll believe it when I see it. That's unfortunately, that's kind of that's a mindset that we have in Cleveland. The Browns are going to Super Bowl. I'll believe it when I see it. You got to believe, people. There's components of these projects like the Sears, and and some of these anchors at these malls, if you're able to activate that first anchor, that can do wonders for the rest of the development. So I would encourage the municipalities to be open to that process, even though it's a little uncomfortable because you don't see the full picture. That can sometimes be the catalyst to blow the site wide open.
Chris makes a
Well,
really good point, and I'll take 30 seconds.
I know we
just
have to cut into time, and I truly apologize. I know that the groups are now rejoining the main room. So, and I'm so sorry, Aaron. I loved this conversation. I could sit here and talk to you and listen to you all day, all three of you. I know our audience had some good questions. Many of you can see those questions on the chat. So I think we got to most of them. There's one or two that I was not able to get in because I loved listening to all three of you. So please, if you have, the author is on there, so feel free to communicate directly with them if you'd like to answer those questions. I promise we'll get all of them answered. Thank you to the three of you. Truly an honor to moderate and be a part of this conversation. And great work to Team Neo and having these breakout sessions as well as the main sessions. Stay tuned right now for some final thoughts from Team Neo's CEO, Bill Kohler. Thank you again. We really appreciate everybody's questions and participation today.